Hello, ULF. This is Chairman Jack. Today we are doing an on May Day or May Day cast, however it turns out. But so we're going to talk about the history, current struggles that we think are important, how people can go about struggle, and overall just the celebration of workers and just things we think are important to discuss on May Day, as it's one of the most important days of the year when it comes to like the proletarian calendar things to do like that. So with no further ado, I'll let my comrades introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Cameron, birth Marxist from Twitter.
Hi there, this is Taras.
And hello, I'm comrade Wiktora.
Yeah, so to start out, I guess we're gonna talk about history. So I'll just hand it off to our two history experts of the day, Taras and Wiktora.
Absolutely. All right, to begin, during the late 19th century, the industrial age was breeding discontent among workers. Extremely dangerous conditions, laughable workplace protections, no guaranteed rights as workers or individuals, and longer hours that were aimed at driving up profits all laid bare the inadequacies of the capitalist system. As bosses' savings grew while theirs dwindled, a genuine push for socialism in the United States was beginning to mount. At the National Convention for the Federation of Organized Trade and Labor Unions, later known as the American Federation of Labor, it was declared that 8 hours shall constitute a legal day's labor from and after May 1st, 1886. The following year, they doubled down on these claims with support of other organizations, including the Knights of Labor. An estimated 250,000 workers in the Chicago area became affiliated with groups such as the Trade and Labor Assembly, the Socialistic Labor Party, and the local Knights of Labor chapters in their effort to bring about the 8-hour workday, which was, for reference, half the average working day of the factory workers of the age. On May 1st, 1886, over 300,000 workers nationwide walked out in the first May Day organized strike in history. Chicago was the center of the action, where 40,000 workers alone, socialists alongside anarchists, walked out of their jobs in protest of the conditions that they were subject to. Peace prevailed for several days, until May 3rd, when violence broke out at the McCormick Reaper Works between strikers and police. Union workers had been subject to harassment by the Pinkerton Agency and the police at the McCormick Works for the previous 6 months, and when a group of roughly 200 assembled on a picket line, police began to attempt to break the line. Rocks were thrown back at the police, which resulted in them opening fire on the demonstrators, killing 2 and wounding an unknown amount. Now incensed, the public coalesced the following day in Haymarket Square to discuss the brutality. Around 3,000 people attended the meeting due to inclement weather and short notice for organizing the event, and the mayor of Chicago himself was among the ranks. He himself testified to the peaceful nature of the demonstration and said that there was no incendiary language being thrown by the supposed inciters of violence. Towards the end of the speech, 2 undercover detectives in the crowd notified police that dangerous rhetoric was coming from the speaker, August Spies, and that the police began to break up the crowd, most of whom had already headed home for the day. As they dispersed the crowd, a bomb was thrown into the ranks of the police from an unknown source. The police fired back in retaliation, killing 8 civilians and wounding an estimated 40 more. 1 police officer perished as a result of the bomb, and it was found that 7 more who would die in the coming weeks would all die of wounds inflicted by their own errant bullets. In total, 8 organizers would be charged with crimes related to the demonstration and the subsequent deaths of the officers. 4 would be hung for their crimes, 1 would commit suicide the night before his scheduled execution, and the 3 remaining organizers would remain imprisoned for 6 more years before being pardoned. But from this was the first May Day internationally, and today it is celebrated in over 60 countries worldwide, despite the fact that its history and origins in the United States have largely been ignored.
Well, I think the biggest response to all of that, at least in my eyes, is the critical importance of knowing why May Day is so important to people and why it's always viewed as like a day of struggle. And I think it's a lot of correlation as to what has always kind of happened in the American proletarian struggle of people trying to rise up just to be brutally suppressed by the police. And you're even seeing it now with like massive police brutality or worker strikes being attacked by the police or Occupy or even the most deadliest attack on American civilians by the military in the form of the Battle of Blair Mountain, where miners who were colloquially known as rednecks for the red scarves that they wore in support of, proletarian struggle, and they got brutally mass murdered by the United States military. And I think all of these things are why it's so important to be spoken on May Day and look at May Day as something of like an important day, as we're kind of looking at it, is just the history of struggle in the United States and around the world, as a critical, kind of day, just as remembrance and thankfulness for the possible struggle in the future.
That's true.
Indeed. And to just bounce off of everything that has been stated, and just going on with the fact that of Pinkerton repression and just police, suppression, and then the military murders that have happened, on the working class as a whole, we should never forget also, the striking, laborers and farmers in the South from, the 1900s onwards, and how they, fought tooth and nail to win barely any concessions. And then the Southern capitalists, brutally just killed them, made whole lots of racial, epithets and whatnot, to the point that, the black laborer was not seen as human at all. And to just bounce off of that, it's also, May Day is also an LGBT struggle as well. And some people, would like to forget that, but people like, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Leslie Feinberg, you know, May Day is their holiday too. They were brutalized by the police, not only just because they were LGBT, but because they were proletarian as well.
Mhm.
And we got to realize that all these struggles overlap and interconnect, and we have to help our fellow, proletarian sister and brethren, all those in between and beyond the stars. But I'm going to stop talking for now.
Well, I think that's exactly it, is that May Day is important because it's kind of this crossroads of all of these different revolutionary proletarian struggles and all of these individual experiences that you have based on the different ways that people are alienated and oppressed by the system. It's that day where all of that coalesces, and it's just universal unity. It's people, regardless of where you're coming from, with what struggle you've faced, you're able to come together and unite as workers and represent your cause and work for a better future together. And I think that's the best aspect of it, is that it promotes that, and it really promotes coalition, and it promotes people to get out there and engage in praxis and to do it alongside one another.
Amen.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for people to look at is that, and this is kind of maybe overstated, maybe it's understated, I don't know, how to depend on how you look at it, but the importance of having these coalitions is so drastically important, as nothing can happen without, everyone having a common goal of liberation. Like the Rainbow Coalition, I think, is a perfect example. How you had people who, going from the Black Panther Party to the Young Lords to the Red Guards to the Young Patriot Organization, who all these different groups had such broad, or the Brown Berets, I should not forget them, but they all had these very different backgrounds and these very different ideas of how to organize. Same thing with SNCC, or just any organization that was in the Rainbow Coalition or the National Congress Against Fascism back in the 70s or 60s. I just think the only way that we can ever succeed is united struggle based on the lines of national liberation and also proletarian liberation. And without having this common idea and these common goals, we're just fed false consciousness and just they're constantly at each other's throats rather than seeking liberation for ourselves and our fellow people.
Yeah.
So I got a question for the entire group. Specifically, how can we, as a proletarian mass, can help one another, especially on days like May Day?
Say that again. What was the last part? On days of what?
On days especially like May Day.
Yeah. I think ways that we can help each other is like simply seeing what one another needs in the moment, because a lot of us are doing organizing work. A lot of us are in places with similar material conditions and also not so similar material conditions. So the most important thing we can do is talk to one another, see what we need and our struggles. Like, let's say I'm in Greensboro. Some folks, what they might need, let's say somebody is in Nebraska. We can share strategies, we can share tactics, we could even share resources if we can give them to one another, so that we can be more successful in our projects of radicalizing the working class masses where we are, talking to the lumpen where we are, and things like that. And Mayday's sort of like a rejoinder, sort of like a reminder of what we're fighting for. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I would entirely agree with that. I think May Day is a day that isn't special on its own. It's special because of what people add to it. And I think what we can do in these times is, support striking workers in the form of how Whole Foods, Target, Amazon are all having a strike today and just not crossing that picket. And I think just viewing May Day as a day of remembrance that we need to, not support scabs and things like that. And, just hold together and stay strong and united. And I think that's just like the simple thing people can do is make sure that when a boycott is going on, you don't cross the picket. I think that is something that is really important. And it's just something really simple that people can do. Well, workers are striking. Well, don't go on Amazon. While workers are striking, don't go to your Target. While workers are striking, well, you don't need your kombucha from Whole Foods. Like, just keep all these things in mind when they're happening. When Uber has a strike like they did a couple of months ago, don't get an Uber. I think there's really basic things that people can do that go a long way. They just have to be remembered and hold strong on these things.
Because the 5 to 10 minute inconvenience that you receive for not getting whatever personal gratification you're looking for there, whatever the strike line is holding you back from, if you can't get your kombucha, you can't get your Pepsi, you can't get whatever, that is worth far less than the fact that they are striking and advocating for their very livelihood, and advocating for their recognition as workers and as individuals, and that's much more important than being able to to get into the Whole Foods parking lot.
And can I also say that we should also keep our heads on a swivel, because liberals are starting to use the language of privilege and try to say, oh well, not everyone has the privilege to be able to strike, because there are people who are too poor to strike, and you shouldn't be striking because you can make them miss out on wages. And people could say things like, oh well, stop being ableist, because some people need to order things and da 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 da. And when you strike, you're being ableist. Like, they'll take the language that we've developed, radical reasons, to actually start radical change and drain it of its radical potential. And we should never give any ground to people who are trying to cynically use our tactics, but like diffuse our tactics, and we should recognize them anytime we hear them and call them out.
Absolutely, because it degrades the overall meaning of those terms, and the actual weight of them, and the roots that they come from, and the shit people had to go through in order to put a voice to that. It just by misappropriating that and taking it and, like you said, draining it of all its actual content and value, it's hollow and it's disrespectful.
Yeah, and to just add on to what people have been saying, most disabled people and most poor people are also the ones that are supporting the strikes to begin with. These liberals do not give a flying F about, what's going on. They just want to destroy us and make us infight.
Mm-hmm.
And like if there is, say a poor comrade that's also disabled, we have networks, or we should be establishing networks to help them so that they don't need to rely on, say, Target, Walmart, Amazon. But regardless, those networks are already in place. And, we as comrades should be always aware against the liberal threat, but also making sure our comrades in general get the support they need so they don't need to rely on yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
Right, engineering those divisions between class, or within classes rather, like that's been a focal point of maintaining the hierarchy that we're in, and like liberals being able to retain their power within government and to continue with the trend towards fascism. And it's difficult to see that, but May Day is a perfect day to recognize that and to use it as an opportunity to look past those false barriers that have been put up between you and the person next to you based on their religion, their sexuality, their color of their skin, whatever it may be. It's the perfect day for building coalition and really uniting as a proletariat.
Yeah, I think a question I kind of propose to everyone is, what do you think is some of, like, in your eyes, some of the most important struggles, whether they be in the United States or abroad, just around the world, that you think people need to gain more knowledge about?
Ooh.
I think rent strikes are a big one right now. I think people should really be pushing that and encouraging that, just with how paltry the response has been from the federal government for providing aid to people who are in dire straits right now, and just providing aid to really, frankly, anyone who has been put through uh, the effects of quarantine and the effects on the economy. And it has been absolutely rampant through lower socioeconomic areas. Like the effects of it have just been so much worse, and those people are receiving much less aid as well. So I think when times are toughest and money is tightest, I think, and you're legitimately unable to meet the demands of your rent and to pay your landlord, I think people need to realize that striking for your rights as a renter and like going on strike is a perfectly valid thing that you should be looking to organize and look to do. And we as Marxist Leninists should then be in turn developing safety nets for those people and seeing that as a reality and possibility for people. Is like, okay, you are living on the line. We want to make sure that you are able to, we will help hold you up.
Mm-hmm. I think in light of all that has transpired in the past few days, I think a struggle that people should keep in mind is the struggle of our Jewish comrades, because uh, they still struggle with anti-Semitism in just about every part of the globe. It's still a dominant feature of many societies, and Jewish comrades, no matter what color or ethnicity or uh, sexual orientation they uphold, they can still be put at risk because of their Jewish heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And Jewish people still suffer violence wherever they go. And you can see anti-Semitism develop in different strains, like strains where they belong, which is on the right. And sometimes you can see anti-Semitism even pop up on the left. And wherever we see it, as Marxist-Leninists, as Marxist-Leninist Maoists, as anarchists, as freaking human beings who care about the plight of other human beings, we should stamp out anti-Semitism anytime we hear it espoused, no matter what language that it tries to color itself as. It might even try to sound radical, might even try to sound revolutionary, but we know that is reactionary anytime we hear it. So we should stamp that out, because it's bourgeois ideology and it's vile and it's disrespectful.
Absolutely, and it ties into those same class divisions that keep you alienated from the person next to you based on these petty differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, in regards to that, is this is not saying, like, we need to go towards Zionism. It's saying that we need to protect Jewish people because Zionism is an how they treat Beta Israelis, how they treat Arab Jews. I think that's a struggle that I personally was the thing that radicalized me when I was like 14 years old, was viewing like the crisis of Palestinians. And I think that's something that is talked about a lot, but more people need to look into, because it's not Muslims versus Jewish people. It's not Arabs versus whoever. I just think it is a national liberation struggle that just needs to be looked at. And I think, sorry for segueing off, but that's something that kind of I look towards as a very important struggle that more people need to look into, because it's a struggle for national liberation of Palestinians, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, whether they're atheists, whether they're Druids, whether they're anything. The main struggle is for national liberation of the Palestinian people from settler colonialist oppression. I just think people need to look into that and understand that it's not a religious issue, it's a national liberation and an oppression issue.
Mm-hmm.
Wiktora, do you have a struggle that you think more people need to look into?
You know what? I will present two struggles that I think, are relevant to the nowadays. The more relevant struggle, would be like organizing within the communities, especially, the poor and disaffected communities. Like, they're basically screwed if they are not allowed to get what they need, like, sanitation equipment, PPE, and whatnot. And this is even more true for doctors who are literally out there right now. Maybe they have the masks now, but they're still underfunded in terms of like PPE, sanitizing their equipment, yada yada yada, and they're risking their lives so that they can cure people. And the governments, the U.S. government, Canada, Britain, who are especially controlled by the bourgeoisie, are not providing the necessary equipment so that doctors can do the work that they need to do. Doctors should not be risking their lives to save people. They should be getting what they need to get so then they can save people. But that's just one struggle. Like, just talk to your doctor, talk to your worker that you see in the grocery stores. Don't cross the picket line because, as Comrade Jack had been saying, like, Mayday strikes are going on right now. Don't cross the picket line. And I guess, a second struggle, kind of less relevant to what's going on right now, but it should always be in our minds, regardless, is just the struggle of the LGBT and whatnot. Because the LGBT community, like, with all that's going on right now, they're going to get hard, they're going to get hit hard with this. And, like, they're going to get denied of their, of necessary medical treatments and whatnot. But like, as I'm saying this, like, LGBT people are getting denied, medical equipment. I've been also hearing that, Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of colors have also been getting denied of their medical, their necessary medical treatments and whatnot. And that's a very screwed up situation. That shouldn't be happening at all. If you're sick, you should get the dang treatment. But that's not happening. And that's a contradiction within capital. But I'm going to spare myself from rambling on any further.
Yeah, I think that was
Yeah.
something that Cam and I had touched on in the eco-fascism video. Real quick, Cam. It was something that we had touched on, was the disproportionate, like the actual studies that have shown like the disproportionate rates of infection and deaths within the African American communities and Latino communities throughout the United States, and especially in like these hotspot areas. And the portion that they make up of, like, the average is, let's say 32% was Louisiana. Was the African American population is roughly 32% of the state, and yet they made up between 70 and 76% of the coronavirus deaths by like the first few weeks of April. It is absolutely insane how it's overlooked, but this is the real struggle going on. This is the real impact of all of this. But yeah, go ahead, take it away, Cam. Sorry, I just had to.
Oh no! All I was saying was all that was said was very relevant. I wasn't really actually going to give a spiel.
Absolutely. Because and that's the thing is the juxtaposition, like it's all of these things that are alongside one another coming together in on May Day and coming together as a united revolutionary struggle and recognizing Jewish comrades, recognizing LGBT comrades, recognizing indigenous comrades, recognizing everyone, no matter like where they come from, because they are in the same struggle as you.
That's right.
Cam or Taras, do you have any questions that you guys want to ask?
Dross, you got anything?
Hmm.
Well,
I guess I would like to see. I'm curious to know how May Day is general consensus on how people have May Day taught to them and presented to them, and how much historical accuracy is provided in the accounts. And because I think that is a big thing, is that the name itself doesn't have much historical attachment and historical context in the United States. So there's something that on a day that is so important for so many people's livelihood, education is just a really vital thing. And I'd like to see what state that's in, and what we can do more as revolutionaries, as you said. Because earlier I said Marxist-Leninist, but I think you're right, Cam, to clarify it as just people who are leftists who legitimately care about other human beings.
That's right. I think with May Day, because of just how commercialized it is, we grew up knowing it as like Loyalty Day or just Labor Day, and that's just a day where your dad gets out on the cooks hot dogs, and maybe you might go to the beach, and they have really good sales that day. But as you've gotten older, you actually learn what May 1st, Labor Day, has come to represent. You realize, oh wow, okay, people were actually getting some stuff done and actually trying to make. This is why it's Labor Day. It's for laborers, supposedly, but now it's sort of been like the radical history has sort of been lost. Well, it hasn't been lost because we can just find it if we just like look hard enough, but like lost to most Americans, but very well known to much of the global South, right?
I personally, bouncing off of that a little bit, I just find it kind of funny that the United States refused to make May Day its Labor Day like most of the world because that was considered too communistic.
Yeah.
So they made it in September in order to try to separate the events from the Haymarket Affair. Because I remember learning about May Day, but all we learned about is the Haymarket Affair a little bit, and you never actually learn about May Day itself. Versus, you hear about Labor Day, but what does that mean? It's like, oh, it's a celebration of working people or whatever. But you never hear anything more than that. You never hear why Labor Day exists and what came to make that day happen and things like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing when you think about it, because it's just like, I say May Day, really it should be Labor Day. I'm saying Labor Day should be May Day, is like you were saying. But it's funny because even when we have Labor Day, and I'm not trying to put too fine a point on it, something called Labor Day is still commercialized and commodified. It's something that's supposed to be about it just shows like how flexible capitalism is, especially in the American context, but also like how market driven every aspect of American culture is. And since it's so plain to see nowadays, I am cautiously optimistic that as long as we keep our messaging up and as long as we keep I hate to say, but proselytizing to the people around us until they get tired of us. Like, hey, look what's going on. Look, labor matters. We can do this. They've done it in the past when things were not as easy. Things are getting harder now, but still easier than it could have been otherwise. So let's form a militant struggle, because these jokers are not going to give anything to us. We're going to have to take it ourselves. As long as we keep on that front, I remain cautiously optimistic about our prospects for the future.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, it's not just look at all of these things around you. It's that we can do this if we are actually willing to work for it. Well, if we're actually willing to put it on the line and recognize these things and then take the next step forward.
Yeah, I think the way you said about being cautiously optimistic, Cam, is I think that's the most important thing about being a revolutionary of any color on the left is simply you have to remain optimistic. You have to have this revolutionary optimism. Um, a good quote that I need to find, which was by I can't remember exactly. It was someone speaking on Lenin. It was simply saying, I think it might have been it was Mark Fisher in his book Capitalist Realism talks about how certain people have such an optimism that it nearly makes them demented. And he described Lenin as demented in his mind on how much he was so optimistic about a revolution coming about. He was driven to the point that all he was doing was trying to organize and trying to ensure a revolution, and it eventually happened. And I think all of us need to have this great optimism, and I know it's so hard in this time coronavirus. It's so hard to remain so optimistic, but I think we have to be optimistic, or else, I believe it was Fred Hampton who said, if something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing pretty heavy, but it's like, if you aren't willing to be active, you're dead already.
Yeah.
And I think we have to stay wanting to be active, and we have to stay wanting to be on a revolutionary path, or else what does any of this mean? You can say you're a Marxist all you want, but if you aren't willing to, at least in your own means, be able to organize and try to spread like a revolutionary message and stay optimistic, then what are you doing?
Yeah. Another Fred Hampton quote to fishtail off of that is, if you dare to struggle, you dare to win.
Yep. There is no such thing as trying to win if you aren't willing to struggle. But I think if Cam, do you have any questions you want to ask? Just as thinking about it, because I think everyone's asked the question except for you, and if you want to.
Okay, I guess. How are you guys planning on like commemorating your May Day today? Are you gonna spend time in reflection? Are you gonna be like in your communities doing like mutual aid work? Or what are you guys gonna be doing today?
I almost thought about going down, and I think I saw a couple things in the works about trying to do a May Day protest via car down in Detroit, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, and I don't know if it actually went through. So I'm probably just going to spend my day reading some Mao and some Lenin's What Is to Be Done, and just sit in reflection about what is possible and what we need to do.
That sounds cool. How about the rest of y'all?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna be talking to. I was planning on getting together with some of my buddies later, so I think I'm most definitely the topic will come up in conversation, because we've been having some. They're not, of any particular leftist persuasion, but they have genuinely empathetic views on human beings, which is, even if you don't have like any sort of specific ideology or framework, as long as you care about other people and recognize like the working class, which they do, like that's what matters. So we've been having a lot of good talks about that. So I think today will be a lot of fun to kick back and talk about kind of the history and like stuff going on around us in the city and things people are dealing with.
And to just bounce off of everyone, considering my location is not very hospitable for, like striking, like for example, the car protests in Detroit, or, the ones striking at Target and Amazon right now. I'm going to spend this time, like reflecting, reading, but also talking to my friends and sharing the history of May Day and further radicalizing them. This day, if you can't do the striking, you should at least be, making communists out of your friends and whatnot.
Cam, what will you be doing today?
Well, I'll be hopefully try my best to avoid all these virtual conferences that I've been on with various organizations I've been organizing with. I've been organizing with Triad, North Carolina's SRA. I am a part of the SRA.
Nice.
But my primary organization is, of course, the Greensboro Working Class and Houses Organizing Alliance, or GSO-WO, as you guys may have seen on Twitter. So I've been organizing with I'm on like 4 different committees within that organization, organizing the logistics for a car rally that we're supposed to be doing pretty soon. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing what's called ROAR, which is the Red Wagon Action Relief Program that we have, where we distribute goods to the houses folks, and I prepared some sanitation packs the previous week on Sunday, and I'm probably going to be doing that again. But I got ROAR tomorrow.
Nice.
I'm going to be out on the range with a few folks, and
Nice.
just making preparations for all that. So I guess it's not quite today, but
Well, that sounds like an action-packed week.
yeah. So what I'm doing today is making preparations for tomorrow, I guess I should say. And
All right.
Whenever that happens.
Well, I think we've had some good conversation, so I think we can wrap it up. Cam, do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, y'all, just continue to give to these really dope organizations like Stop Displacement, or like you'll see like called Red Braid. GSO-WO is doing great things. Pretty soon, if you guys listen closely, I might appear on another podcast other than this one. It's called Rev Left Radio. If anyone's heard.
Ooh,
Nice.
lovely.
So me, Billy, and Louis Medina from GSO-WO, we're talking about the work that we do in Greensboro. We're going to be on that podcast. You know, it's just as great as this podcast right here. Just let y'all know. Hate to plug a podcast, but in a podcast, you know, podcastception.
That's the way to do it.
Oh, it's great. Spread the word.
But I don't know all y'all's individual Twitter handles, but I would plug all y'all because y'all are wonderful comrades, and I enjoy talking to you.
Oh, bless.
Oh, thank you, brother.
Well, thank you so much. I've been Chairman Jack.
I've been Cameron.
Taras.
And I'm Comrade Wiktora.